And this is the last day for bill introductions in local government. Are there any bill introductions? Okay, because the deadline is Monday. At this time, we're going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 384, allowing ambulances in rural communities to operate with only minimal personnel required by state law. Jason Long will be our give us our reviser's brief. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 84 should look somewhat familiar to you. There was a bill last session, Senate Bill 212, that proposed an alternative approach to the same issue. Last year's bill tried to prescribe a lesser certification standard for the second individual in an ambulance operating in a rural community. Senate Bill 384 takes a more simplified approach and simply says that the board, the EMS board, cannot require any ambulance that's providing emergency medical service in a rural community to operate with any additional personnel other than what is minimally required under subsection B of that statute. Subsection B says that at least one person in the vehicle has to have proper certification, be an individual licensed to practice medicine and surgery, a physician assistant or advanced practice registered nurse or a professional nurse. And so at least one person has to have those certifications operating in the vehicle, and nobody else has to be required to be in the vehicle under Senate Bill 384. So that's what this bill does compared to last year. It would go into effect on July 1st of this year if it's enacted, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Jason? Senator Foscato.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, say that again, please. So a total of how many in the ambulance?
The bill, the EMS board cannot require more than the one person who has to have those medical certification, one of those medical certifications under subsection B.
So what about the driver?
Under this bill, that person could be the driver of the vehicle.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Stroud.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this might be a question for research and not for Jason, but how many counties have a population of under 50,000?
We can find that number for you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Jason. We have 2 hearings today, and we have a lot of people that would like to speak. So I would like for you to try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, and if I do think you're going too long, I'll cut you off. So at this time, we'll begin with the proponents. We have Spencer Duncan, Director of Governmental Affairs, League of Kansas Municipalities. Welcome.
Good morning. Nice thing is, change of pace. We won't even talk about home rule this morning, so that's good for all of us, right? As Jason said, current state statute mandates that one individual on a vehicle must be certified pursuant to the various statutes that are in my testimony, and this is the healthcare professional. The KAR, which was passed, the rules and regs that were passed require a minimum of 2 attendants or 1 attendant and 1 healthcare provider. To clarify, when we wrote this, we do have an amendment already because, you write things and people say, wait a minute. Our intent of this bill is to still have 2 individuals on the vehicle. One of them just needs to be a qualified driver, and then the other needs to be the healthcare attendant who's in the back with the individual. So, oops, right? When you write things, they suck good. So I want to clarify, we do have that amendment. What this comes down to for our communities is that a lack of flexibility with drivers of ambulances increases patient wait times to obtain critical health care across Kansas. Fact is, the smaller communities have fewer personnel. You are all aware of those issues being keyed into the problems in some of our rural communities. I will also say we support that the drivers would need to have CPR training at a minimum. We also support allowing local EMS services to determine whether drivers should have additional training. So we are open to those suggestions and recommendations too. There is a waiver that was approved by the EMS board after last year's conversation. I do want to thank them. Give credit where credit is due. It's better, it's easier to get, and it's 12 months long. We appreciate that. The problem with that is it's only 12 months, which it could go away, right? We like some sort of long-term commitment. And the second piece of that relates to hiring and training. So if you get this 12-month waiver and you say, okay, now I'm going to go find another qualified driver or shift my personnel around, and you've done that work, either hiring or retraining some folks, and then you don't get the waiver, it goes away, you've now you've shifted your personnel situation around to fit something that is no longer available to you. So that's also a concern of some of our communities. On the amendment, again, clarify, we absolutely expect 2 people. The amendment, I believe, also clarifies that this only is to apply to ground transportation. We understand we're not helicopters, right? We don't want we don't want to touch the helicopter situation. And I believe the amendment may also make sure this is only for facility transfers. We do not want to step on emergency management services, the day-to-day operations of EMS, not at all. This is only when you've got to transfer those individuals from one place to another who traditionally are stable, we hope, if they're being transferred. So we hope the amendment clarifies that. And the last point I'm going to make is these decisions haven't been made by the bureaucrats who operate city government. These conversations are having with local emergency medical professionals too in these communities who have had input into how this would work, whether they would think it's good for the patients. So it's not just the elected folks making these decisions. It is the emergency management professionals in these small communities also asking for these. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Spencer. We're going to hold questions until we hear from everyone. Other proponents, there's written testimony in your packet. Dave Garnus, Administrator, North Central Kansas Medical Center, Concordia. Randy Lease, President of Kansas Legislative Policy Group, and Amy Lang, Concordia City Manager. Are there any other proponents that came today that expected to speak? Seeing none, we'll move to the proponents and, the opponents, and we have Joseph House, the Executive Director, Kansas Board of Emergency Medical Services. Welcome to the community.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Joe House, the Executive Director of the Emergency Medical Services Board, and testimony is relatively short. The board does oppose Senate Bill 384, probably with the amendments that were offered going through, just because I think that does get a little bit closer to 212, but we were opposed also to 212 as well. So not necessarily that. Obviously, just heard the amendments, not being able to comment completely on those until we see what they look like. But Senate Bill 384, as it currently exists, is just dangerous. And so that's the reason the board opposes it. Having just a requirement for a sole person on an ambulance is a terrible idea. And we're happy to hear that that was not the intent. We didn't anticipate that that was the intent. So great catch and oversight. And again, we're credits due. I will just speak very quickly on the variance side of that, which is the last half of the testimony, because we are very excited about this process with those 5 services that have gone through the steps of getting this variance done since it was approved last April. So we were a little bit concerned with the delay, not seeing that first one come in until late October, but very happy to pronounce City of Washington is our first going live ambulance service today with that model under the variance. And whereas, yes, it is a 12-month period, the legislature only granted us the ability to grant a variance on a temporary basis, so we have to put an end date on it, but there's no restrictions on how many times that gets renewed. And the fact of the board does have the authority to rescind a guidance document doesn't end its expiration date through where it goes through, and that must be done within a public meeting of our board. So that would offer the opportunity for testimony on both sides to say either keep it or let it go before the board would ever consider letting that go away. So Senate Bill 384, we still think is not necessarily where we want to be. Grant us that ability with that variance process to continue to study this matter and bring forth a legislative fix if one, so once we have the evidence to support that one works. And then I just want to offer to the committee, I am more than happy to provide progress reports to the committee on how that variance process is going, if that would be beneficial. So happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you. And you can send that to my office and we'll get it out. So thank you. Next, we have Shane Pearson, President of the Kansas State Firefighters Association, Vice Chair of the Kansas Board of Emergency Services. Welcome, Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to briefly discuss this with the committee and give our viewpoints as well. Provided written testimony as well. Just a few points on there. Ultimately, the regression that this potentially could do to Kansas EMS overall. There's a lot of effort that went in over the years to get Kansas EMS to be a leader of where it's at now, and this type of legislation potentially could damage that, especially with the variance process in place now. I concur with Director House's comments of letting it have some time to see if it does resolve the issues that are out there. That, I guess from my point of view, being an EMS service director also for the Salina Fire Department, we operate the ambulance service for our county. I would question if there's any documented evidence that a patient has not made it to higher level of care because of lack of ambulance staffing. It could be out there, but something that I'm not aware of at this point. Again, there's processes in place for individuals at some of those local agencies to get education. Grant programs that are out there where there would be very little, if any, cost to provide EMS education to get individuals certified as EMTs. I think the struggle is sometimes finding those individuals that even are aware that the local service is looking for additional staff. So things of that nature that are all in place that I think not only the executive director would be willing to answer, but any of the board members too at any point in time, and myself as a service director in Central Kansas would be happy to answer questions for other agencies that are having issues. But I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you, Shane. Jeff Boss, Chair of Mid-America Regional Council Emergency Rescue, EMS Battalion Chief, MedAct. Welcome to the committee.
A little switcheroo. Jason White. I work for Marker. Jeff is the authority in which I speak. We'll be brief. So Marker represents the metro area, Missouri and Kansas. We've got 35 ambulance services on both the state line. We followed this issue. It's supposed to be rural. It's not. The 50,000 person mark brings it right into Johnson and Wyandotte County because we have communities, as it says cities or counties. So we have a lot of communities that are under 50,000. So we're going to end up with a patchwork of where do I set up my ambulance service so I could qualify under 50,000 so I have lesser staff. This is not a problem in the metro area. So we would prefer that it be adjusted so that it's not implicating the metro area. We absolutely respect. So my second point is this is really a microcosm. The transfer issue, rural ambulance services. So I'm old, I'm on a bunch of national committees. I'm working this issue on the Missouri side in two different contexts as a facilitator, not an expert. Nationally, and I grabbed last night another little handout, there's a lot of reports because rural ambulance services have staffing, but they got financial problems, they got organizational problems, they got problems collecting in the billing. It's a Band-Aid. So I'd encourage you as you go through this conversation with the providers, the issue's going to be back. Rural EMS is struggling nationwide. It is not just Kansas. And so taking this approach, you're just kicking the ball down the road. One of the things that I want to take advantage of some of us are pushing to get on the federal level. Right now, hospitals in rural areas are funded in critical care access as a percentage of their cost instead of a flat rate. And so there is a budding movement to do that for rural ambulance services. I just brought a handout. I don't know the official process to do handouts. Those were my comments. Keep it out of the metro area and think bigger. It's a bigger problem than just the transfers.
Okay, and I'm not sure you gave your name. Did you?
Jason White.
Okay, I just want to make sure we have it for the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have David Adams, President of the Kansas Emergency Medical Services Association. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Kansas EMS Association, we represent 117 EMS services in the state of Kansas. We are opposed to this bill as well for several reasons. One, Kansas EMS Association is against anything that's going to lower the standard of care for patients in the state of Kansas. This would absolutely do that. So I think that is something that we need to acknowledge. Two, as Director House had said, the variance was put in place. People didn't like it. They restructured it, put it back in place. Let us see if this works. Let us understand the problem and see if this works. So, but my third point is, as the proponent stated, interfacility transfers, and quote, we hope they're stable. So what if they're not stable? And you have one provider at a low level with a patient who's not stable for anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours. So that patient is not going to get the care that they need, that they deserve, and that they expect. So we need to be very careful about this. This, even with the amendments, is a wide open Pandora's box. And we need to think about the patients and whether we're doing what's right by them. On the other side of that, as a service director, as a paramedic, one person in the back of an ambulance by themselves, without another provider, even if they're driving, that you can talk to, that you can share information, you can ask if you're on the right track, that you can work with, leaves that provider hanging out to dry. And they will feel very vulnerable. And if something does not go well, they're on their own, they're by themselves. Their mental well-being is going to suffer tremendously. It's bad enough when we have another provider who we're working with on a call when a patient is critical or sick or even degrades in their condition. It's bad enough when we say, we have two people saying, we did the best we could, we talked about it, we worked through it, we had a plan of action. When you're by yourself, you have nobody to turn to, and you're trying to deal with a sick patient who needs more care than one person can have, that's going to kill our staff. So if you have a staffing problem now, you're not going to have staff because they're going to say, I can't do this. I was on my own. I felt helpless and I felt abandoned. So this is going to hurt our staff. This is going to hurt the people who are there to take care of them because they cannot mentally deal with this. We have providers commit suicide every year, and they do it when they have people with them. As a service director, if I had a provider who came in, I could only do so much for them, right? I could get them some mental help. I could maybe reassign them for a short time to help them work through their emotions. But at the end of the day, these providers are going to feel like they have been left out to dry, like they should have done more, but they couldn't do more because they were by themselves. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Is there anyone else that would like to speak as an opponent? Seeing none, is there anyone here that would like to speak as a neutral? We have committee, you have been emailed a neutral testimony and from Carrie Rinker, Director of Governmental Relations for the American Heart Association, and that is in your email. So at this time, we'll open up for questions. Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to talk to, I believe, the last guy that talked. Joseph, right?
Oh, David.
David Joseph. Go through the whole Bible thing, huh? I'm from western Kansas. We're pretty proud of what out there, but you're talking about, even if the driver is the only one, that he's qualified with the dude in the back or the dame, either one. I'd seem like you're, we have FaceTime now, we have radios, we have everything else. Then we're going to have a distracted driver. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why, if we have a qualified person in the back, and the difference between that and having just one person in the ambulance that's qualified, that's driving, versus somebody who's not necessarily qualified can drive an ambulance, and the other person's in the back, versus one person as a driver that can stop maybe on the side of the road, help the dude or the person out a little bit. This really doesn't make any sense. Make this make sense to me. And we're talking about rural Kansas. We're not talking about Buncie or something like that. We're talking about.
Well, the difficulty is the person driving, right, they said they can help them out. They're talking about somebody who has CPR training. So I'm talking about a patient who is starting to have respiratory problems or somebody who's starting to have a seizure. And when we're treating those, you want to make sure you're understanding what you're seeing, okay? So let's talk about respiratory issue, right? If you have another qualified person with you, you can say, pull over, okay, this is what I'm seeing. They're having this, my vital signs are showing this, my end-tidal CO2 is showing this. I think we need to do CPAP. And somebody say, well, yeah, but what about BiPAP? Or what about intubating them? When you have somebody who's just a driver, who just has CPR, you don't have somebody to bounce that information off of to help you.
Can I follow up, please? So my understanding on this bill, there only has to be one person in there as long as they're qualified, correct?
Correct.
So what you're telling me that, you have somebody to talk to in front that's qualified also, or they've got just one person that's qualified that happens to be driving. There again, that don't make no sense to me when we have CPR, we have FaceTime and all this other stuff.
Well, so the person who's qualified is in the back with the patient. So,
And he might be driving and be the only one in there other than the patient.
then that goes back to the standard of care is dropping incredibly. The most qualified person for that patient should be in the back providing patient care.
According to law, he can be driving.
Well, with this bill, correct. According to current law, no, because there has to be 2 qualified people in the ambulance. That's the difference.
All right, other questions? Senator Reichman.
Thank you, and I'd like to have Mrs. Spencer, Duncan, I don't know, maybe. Thank you, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming and speaking. 2 questions. One, you mentioned about an amendment, and I didn't see the amendment. Is an amendment being worked up?
Hey, Jason, has that been drafted? Okay, it is, apparently it has been drafted, and we're happy to get it to you. Yes.
And I'm also in a rural area, and in fact, I got some letters in here for people in my area like this bill. But I wonder if you would tell me why is it that you thought it was necessary to have this legislation? Thank you.
Sure. So again, I'll go back to the fact that personnel issues in rural Kansas are a problem. So I think for those medical professionals in those communities, they are working very hard to find the balance between how do we deal with the very practical issue of only having so many people to do this job. And if I have to take 2 of them out of service to do a transport, which by the way, keep in mind, isn't just 30 minutes down the road in many of these cases. It's to Nebraska and to Colorado and to Oklahoma. It's hours, which means that's an entire shift. By the time they came back, that's a second shift they're out of service. That's a 48-hour possible period that their limited personnel is out. That's a problem because then you are taking that second person away from emergency services in that community. And that's the crux of the problem. We are trying to find a balance between making sure we are absolutely serving the people who are facility transports, who are in a position to make that move versus making sure we have enough personnel on the ground for emergency services. It's not an easy call, but looking at the original state statute, and even though we may have, our intent was still to have the 2 people, the 1 qualified driver, those professionals in those communities, some of you heard from, have decided this still makes sure that those people are taken care of in the right way while also serving the people back home.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 different questions. Spencer, if you might stay. My first question is this bill intended only for facility transfers? Because I'm happy to see that you all are coming around to our Western Kansas way of thinking as I introduced similar legislation last year. But in order to avoid the political games that are often played with bills that easily pass through the legislature, I had partnered with the EMS board director and worked out a solution to help these small communities. But is this bill, Senate Bill 384, is that intended only for facility transfer or transport from the scene of an accident or of someone's home to a facility?
Only facility transports. Now, the home to a facility, not in a.
Like you're saying facility to.
Our intent is facility to facility. Yes, I mean, that is, and I will double check with the folks to make sure, but they may be they're either shaking their head yes or no behind me, I don't know, but
So
Amy, is that right? Facility, Amy? Yeah, facility, yes, facility to facility, because those are just very time consuming for folks. But no, our intent is not to, if it's at all considered anywhere under that of emergency service of any type, and that can often be a home to a facility because they may be in distress of some kind, we don't want to touch that. We want to keep all that authority with those folks who are in it every day.
Okay, that is not, I don't think that was the original, what people had come to me with the issue
Right.
of. So if you could provide some examples of the.
And that's hopefully what this
communities.
amendment will clarify, because we all sort of read the statute differently, right? We read it one way, then the smart people, the revisers, come back and say, well, actually, I think you read it wrong, Duncan. And so the amendment is very much intended to clarify.
Okay,
that.
thank you. And my next question is for Joseph House. Just real quickly, how many waivers have you provided to these rural communities, especially the ones that testified last year in this committee?
So we've had, Madam Chair, we've had 5 services apply since October 31st. One of them, Miltonville, I can name all 5, City of Washington EMS, Miltonville Ambulance Service, Claflin Ambulance Service, I'm sorry, Clifton City Ambulance, not Claflin, my apologies there, Waterville, and Norwich EMS. So.
Thank you. And I think there may be a couple others, but I know that with their short staffing that they already have, and some of the drivers being into their 80s, that I know I had specifically asked you if you would please assist them in applying for this and getting those waivers granted. So thank you for reporting back that you were able to help at least 5 communities. I do appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. And on the variance process, I do want to say our variance process does cover both 911 and interfacility transports. Where we restrict interfacility is the patient must be stable. They must not be expected to decline during transport, and the care being provided no higher than the level of an EMT, but I can provide that to you.
I want to let the committee know we'll be cutting it off at 10 after, but we will not close the hearing, so you'll have another opportunity. But we have other people that are out of town. Senator Fascadell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Shane. So Shane, you're the current chairperson for the state EMS board, correct?
The vice chair.
Vice chair.
Dr. Warnig is the chair of the board.
Yes, and then you said you are the head person in Salina?
So, correct. I'm the deputy chief for the Salina Fire Department, and with one of my primary duties is to operate and oversee administrative operation of our ambulance service.
What's your staff number?
Total employees?
Yes.
Roughly 80,
Okay.
divided, it's a full-time, and we're short-staffed as well to a certain extent. We face some challenges with interfacility transports, just as other agencies may.
So with, just for clarification for those listening in, because I'm getting text messages of clarification. So current law, how many are on the ambulance, and including the driver in your town?
Under current law, it requires 2 certified EMS providers to be on the ambulance. No, just not one driving, one in the back as minimum. That's the minimum current law. Correct.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question was for Joseph House, and I appreciate that your last answer to the question included some of this, so I'm interested if you could provide us the language of the waiver, just to the secretary. Is it in?
I actually have a copy of our guidance document just with me, and I'm happy to just leave it, if that would work.
Give it to Jackie, please.
You can give it to Jackie. So that would be very helpful, because I appreciated understanding the other requirements that you were including in that waiver. And I'm glad the committee can discuss this further.
Okay, thank you. Senator, what's her name? Bowers.
Bowers. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And Joe, as you mentioned, those communities, those are my districts. So listening to constituents and how we solve this problem together. So could I ask you a couple questions, Joe? So tell us about the variance. Like, how did you supply that to our communities? How did they know to act or look for it? What's your process?
Absolutely. So thank you, Madam Chair. Our process on the variance, one, it's discussed in an open meeting. The board did approve that at their April 7th meeting. We meet every other week, or had up until the month of December when things got busy, with all service directors. We put out a briefing with them, give them the opportunity to come on. We mentioned this variance process on that numerous times. We did have the proponents to Senate Bill 212 that we reached out to specifically, had conversations with each of them, talking about the variance and the process of going through. It's very easy to apply. It's done within minutes, simply, and it can be just a letter to us as well. I mean, the city of Milton Vale submitted a letter that said here, we asked them for just a little bit more detail on what training they were going to provide and how that was going to look prior to it becoming approved. Phone conversations with others. I know another specific service within your district, we had a very long phone conversation about concerns that they expressed about the variance process and how going through. Gave them another solution to consider, because sometimes sending two people on these transfers is the appropriate thing, because the data that they have on the backside shows the likelihood of them gathering an emergency call during that same period is very, very slim. So when you look at the variances that have been approved to date, most of those services have fewer than 100 calls a year that they're truly responding to, less than 50 transports a year. The likelihood of them having that second call within that window while they're gone has been statistically negligible for 5 to 10 years. So
I won't go on too much longer. One more question, Joe. We limit you as the legislature limits you to 1 year, like this variance. You'll have to come back and you'll have to renew it every year if we find this is successful. Is that what you're telling us?
So, Madam Chair, the variance process must be temporary. The board set a 2-year top end of it, that they would allow it to go for a full 24 months prior to it needing to be renewed and another request for the variance to come back through. We gave an option at 12 months. You could do a 12-month variance if you opted, and it would not necessarily trigger the need for you to communicate this out to your community immediately. There was a concern that if we had to hold a public hearing within the community would become frightened and would actually be counterproductive to the success of the variance. So 12 months period of time, no public hearing. If they look to extend it beyond 12 months, they do have to let their community know they're struggling.
I'm glad you're keeping the hearing open so we can keep working out these details. And I am happy that you heard the committee last year on trying to find a solution. And I'm nowhere near 50,000, so we might have to talk about that, Spencer. Okay, so we still have some compromises here. I think we can still find a good answer. So thank you, Joe.
Senator Schallenberger, is your question for someone that's out of town, or can it wait till we open the hearing? It can wait, thank you. All right, at this time, we are going to change directions on bills. We will keep this hearing open. And then we hope that this information that everybody's requesting will be before us the next time we come back to SB 384. At this time, we're going to hear an overview from Jason on House Bill 2176, creating our Kansas City Area Public Library District Act and the Udall Area Public Library District Act, requiring election for the creation of such district and authorizing unified school districts number 470 and 463 to levy a tax on behalf of such library district. Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Bill 2176 started out as simply the Kansas City Area Public Library District Act to create a new library district, or at least authorize the creation of a new library district. What it would do is the current Board of Trustees of the Arkansas City Public Library could adopt a resolution to create a new library district. That library district would consist of the territory of USD 470 down there in Cowley County. And the resolution would authorize the district to propose a tax levy to fund the library district. If the resolution is adopted, then there would be an election, a local election to approve the creation of the new library district with the taxing authority, and that would go to a vote of the people. If approved, then there would be a new district created. All the contracts of the current city public library would convert over to the public library district. There would be a new board created, a 7-member board of trustees. 4 of those members would be appointed by the city of Arkansas City, with 1 of them having to reside outside of the city limits. The other 3 members of that board would be appointed by the Board of Education of USD 470, and all 3 of those would be required to live outside the city limits. They would have 4-year terms and be limited to only 2 consecutive terms before having to move off the board. Other provisions of the bill establish the organizational structure of this Board of Trustees, confers upon them the standard rights, privileges, and responsibilities of a public body, requires free use of the library by residents of the library district, and allows the board to extend use and privilege of the library to non-residents, and charge a reasonable fee for that usage if necessary. And then the other key part of the bill is requires the library district to prepare an annual budget, present that to the Board of Education, USD 470, have it certified, and then the budget resolution would state the total tax to be levied by the Board of Education for the library district. It would not be a tax levy of the USD 470, but it runs through USD 470's board for certification to be levied on the residents of the library district. And that resolution would be required to be published in the official newspaper, and any increase in the levy would be subject to a protest petition and election. The other part of House Bill 2176 was an amendment by the House Committee to add a Udall Area Public Library District Act to it as well. This would function in the same way in terms of creation of the district, the authority of the district, taxing authority. All of that is the same as what I just described for the Arkansas City Library District. Here it would be the Udall Public Library Board of Trustees would adopt the resolution to create the library district subject to approval by the electorate. And then it would still be a same 7-member board, although 4 members would be appointed by the city of Udall, 3 by the USD 463 Board of Education. And so this library district, the Udall Library District, would be the boundary of USD 463, would comprise the library district in that case. All the other provisions are the same as I described with the Arkansas City Library District. I will also point out there is an amendment, pages 9 and 10, to an existing statute to simply add these 2 library districts to the State Grants and Aid to Libraries Act, so they would be included as local libraries under that act. The bill did pass the House last March on a vote of 110 to 12. If it becomes effective, if it becomes enacted, it becomes effective July 1st of this year, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions, quick questions for Jason, Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell us how this funding would interact with the funding for the state library district or the state library appropriations? And maybe that's a question for Jill for research, because my understanding is that there's the grant program.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I said that, the grant program.
No, I'd have to defer to somebody else to look into it. I'm not familiar with the monies that flow from that grants and aid program.
Thank you.
We'll have that answer when we come back. So this bill will be continued as well. Mike, can you wait so we can take care of the folks that came from out of town? Thank you. Our first presenter will be Mindy Fonestill, Director of the Arkansas City Public Library. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. And I'm here to speak on behalf of my Board of Directors in favor of House Bill 2176. For us, passing this bill does two major things. One is it gives local area residents the opportunity to decide how they want to fund and support and receive library services. Another big thing for us is that it allows us to own property. Libraries in Kansas aren't normally allowed to own property. And for that really helps us with some long-term planning. If this goes to a local election, a ballot measure, and then that gets approved by our local residents, there's a lot of benefits to our library and to our community. One of the big things that does is it allows us to help push out some early literacy, parent engagement, family support programs. Ark City was identified as one of 8 communities in Kansas by the Kansas Health Foundation as having very low literacy rates. These are kids coming into school before they get to school. And so we had some grant funding, part of a local coalition of groups that was working on that. And we'd like to try to continue that work. A few other things that we're hoping to focus on are our bookmobile and outreach services, especially in rural areas where it might not be as easy for them to access services, and also kind of addressing broadband and internet, like lack of access, especially in rural areas. And a lot of doing that is we're short-staffed right now, so we would need additional staffing to help carry out those programs. And more employed people in our community is great for our local economy too. So we're just hoping that you support this also, and that you give our local people the voice and the decision to decide for themselves if this is the way they want to proceed. So,
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mindy, and thank you for coming to the Capitol. Monica Rupp, Director of Udall Public Library. Welcome.
Madam Chairman and committee members, my name is Monica Rupp. I'm from the Udall Public Library in favor of this bill, obviously. Our library is one of 3 public libraries in Cali County. It's the only one in a town less than 11,000 people. And so our town is extremely fortunate. As you've seen, our population's roughly 600 to 700 people. We're very fortunate to have a library. However, as you also saw in my written testimony, our budget is extremely small. I mean, it is extremely hard to provide adequate services up to normal library standards, to provide good programs for our patrons with this kind of budgeting. This bill has the potential to really change that. If we can ask our voters what they would, if they are okay with expanding our taxing district, our revenue would increase, and that would make our burden a lot lighter and, just a lot less stressful trying to keep a good library in a small town. And so it would do 2 things for us if this passes the Senate and then it goes to a vote. The first one would be the increased revenue, which we could increase the number of programs we do and actually have better quality programs. We would actually be able to buy more new materials. Most of the materials we currently purchase are used, especially books. They're $1 to $5. When somebody requests like a new book, we can only buy so many a year because of our budget. And the other thing we can't do right now, as you've seen, like our utilities are still being paid by our city through their own budget. And so this bill would give us the chance for a little more revenue, which down the road, maybe we'd be able to go ahead and start paying some of those bills instead of having to have them do it. So we currently are unable to pay utilities and like most of our insurance. The second benefit it would have for our area is that we have lopsided funding. So if the voters would actually choose to go ahead and expand our district to the school district, 92% of our patrons would live in that area then. Currently, only 45% of our patrons live within the city, which is the current taxing district. So if they would choose to expand, we would actually be very fairly and equally distributing, the cost of the library among 92% of the patrons, their area that they live in. I am one of the people who lives outside of town, and I am within the school district. My family's used the library for years, and I believe just because we are outside of town doesn't mean, that we don't have a stake in our community, in our town. I really think that our library is very important to our community. I think we need to have that there so people can take classes, they can check out materials, make copies, use free Wi-Fi, use computers. And it gives the kids a place to go when, you know, they're out of school, things to do. And for some of our older people in our community, it's a place to get out of the heat during the summer and just, you know, socialize a little bit. And so I really would ask the committee to please consider this and just give the voters the chance, you know, to kind of decide whether we would like to go ahead and expand the taxing district. So anyway, I thank you for your time, and if you have any questions.
Thank you for being here. So we have opponents written, Sharon Moreland, Director of Southeast Kansas Library System, and you also have neutral written from Ray Walling, State Library of Kansas, Gail Santee, Director of Central Kansas Library System, Paul Hawkins, Director of South Central Kansas Library System. So when we reschedule this, Mike would certainly want to hear from you. And I would also encourage Mindy and Monica, if you're not able to be here, we have an online link, but please let my assistant Jackie know that you are online because some of the committee members may have questions for you. So we can handle it that way as well. Committee, I did not realize the popularity of the two bills, and so I mismanaged that. But we'll get back to these and make sure you get all your questions answered. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I read ahead a little bit in the testimonies that was written, and I think most of my questions about the grant program have been answered in the testimony from the state librarian.
Okay, so we can look at that before we come back. Any other business? Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick question for Mindy or Monica, either one of you. Do you have kind of an idea of what the community is feeling in regards to creating a library district? I mean, what is your feedback so far?
Feedback, especially from people in city limits, for them, it's going to lower taxes for them. So they're very excited about that. For people outside of the area, it could raise that. But from the people that I've known in rural areas, they really value those library services. And I think they would be willing to pay their fair share for the same services that they are receiving, that city residents are receiving at a higher price. So, yeah, I think we have a lot of support.
All right. Thank you. Again, join us online if you can't be here. So if there's no other business to come before us, we are adjourned.